We are counting down the 10 spaces and experiences that transformed Black neighborhoods in the 1970s into a paradise for every child. From hubs that taught survival skills disguised as play to everyday rituals that built lifelong resilience, these ranked entries reveal how ordinary sidewalks, shops, and stoops became training grounds for friendship, creativity, and agency. Some will spark instant nostalgia, while others might surprise you with just how much they shaped a generation. So, what kicks off our list of joyful ingenuity? Let us start at number 10. Under the glow of neon lights and the thump of funk and disco, Detroit's roller rinks became more than just a place to skate. They were a rite of passage. For a handful of coins, kids could slip on rental skates and join the swirl of laughter and music on polished floors. Rinks like Northland drew in crowds from blocks away, especially on teen nights, when the dress code meant everyone dressed sharp, ready to impress. Floor guards, often older teens themselves, kept a watchful eye, not just for spills and scuffles, but for teaching the unspoken rules of the rink. They showed newcomers how to glide and sink, how to fall and get back up, and how to treat the space and each other with respect. The snack bar and rental counter buzzed with small transactions, giving kids a taste of independence and responsibility. Even with strict hours and a fee at the door, the rink offered a kind of freedom, an indoor world where every child could be part of the rhythm, learning from mentors on wheels, and feeling the pulse of the community in every turn. On the sidewalks of Brooklyn in 1976, the snap of double Dutch ropes set the rhythm for an entire block. Girls in homemade uniforms, each stitched for less than $5, gathered after school 3 times a week, turning cracked pavement into a training ground. The city championship team was not built in a gym. Their routines, timed to the second, demanded precision, 90 seconds to leap, twist, and chant in perfect unison. Peer coaching ruled the day. Older girls called out the counts, corrected footwork, and kept the ropes moving with a steady, practiced whip. Rhymes echoed off stoops, old standards, and new verses, cataloged and traded like prized possessions. Each practice was a lesson in discipline and choreography, led by girls for girls, with no adults needed to referee. By the time competition day arrived, the team's routine was as sharp as any Broadway show, but the applause came from friends and neighbors crowding the curb. In these street-side academies, every jump was a show of skill and sisterhood, and every rope crack marked another beat in the soundtrack of Black girlhood. On a humid August evening in 1973, the rec room at 1520 Sedgwick Avenue in the Bronx filled with the buzz of anticipation. Cindy Campbell's handwritten flyers promised a back-to-school party for just 25 cents, with every dime set aside for new notebooks and shoes. But it was her brother, Clive, known as Cool Hearst, who transformed the building's community space into something unforgettable. Kids and teens lugged heavy speakers up the stairs, snaked extension cords through hallways, and tapped into apartment outlets, turning the hum of the building into the pulse of the night. Herc's 2 turntables, wired together with borrowed parts, let him loop the drum breaks from James Brown and the Incredible Bongo Band, stretching the beat longer and longer. This merry-go-round style sent dancers into a frenzy, their sneakers pounding the floor while the bass rattled pipes and window panes. Children were not just spectators, they were the crew, hauling gear, passing out flyers, and learning to move a crowd with a shout or a record drop. The party spilled out onto stoops and sidewalks, where the sound system's thump drew kids from blocks away. That night, a single building's rec room became a launch pad for a culture, powered as much by the sweat and hustle of neighborhood children as by the music itself. The bell above the door chimed every time a child stepped into Mr. Davis's corner store on Chicago's South Side. Inside, glass jars lined the counter, each packed with penny candies, jawbreakers, fireballs, licorice ropes priced so even the smallest hands could count out change. The store's most important book wasn't a ledger for suppliers, but a thick, dog-eared notebook kept behind the counter. Kids called it the book, and it worked like a micro bank. When pockets ran empty, a child could whisper, "Put it on the book, please." And Mr. Davis would scribble a name, sometimes a nickname, sometimes just Lil Man or Peaches, alongside a few cents owed. The unwritten rule was clear. No one's tab could go over $1, and debts had to be settled by the end of the week. If a balance lingered too long, a quick phone call or a gentle word to a parent waiting outside was enough to set things straight. The storekeeper's trust wasn't given lightly, but once earned, it taught a simple lesson. Credit was a privilege, not a right. Each transaction, whether for a single piece of bubble gum or a handful of lemon drops, was a lesson in honesty and responsibility. In these daily exchanges, children learned the rhythms of commerce, the value of a promise, and the quiet dignity of being known by name. The corner store was more than a place to buy sweets. It was a classroom where the currency was trust, and every penny counted. Patches of grass and dirt, edged by chain link and wildflowers, dotted Atlanta's Black neighborhoods in the late 1970s. These lots were not parks on any city map. They were leftovers from redlining and stalled development, marked as hazard or declining on old HOLC surveys. But for kids, they became stadiums built by hand and imagination. The first ritual before a game was to clear the glass and rocks, sometimes with a broom borrowed from home, sometimes with bare hands. Chalk lines marked the baselines for a stickball or kickball, and a bent wire or an old milk crate nailed to a telephone pole stood in for a basketball hoop. Teams formed by age and skill, with the oldest kids negotiating house rules. No sliding on gravel, winner keeps the field, and the youngest always got last at bat. Arguments over fouls or outs ended in quick votes, enforced by whoever was oldest or tallest that day. In 1977, a group from Summerhill organized a neighborhood tournament, cobbling together a trophy from a broken lamp in a plastic cup. The pride in that prize outshone anything store-bought. When city officials toured the area, they found not just empty lots, but fields alive with children's laughter and the hum of self-governance. Even in spaces written off by banks and planners, every game was a lesson in leadership and invention, with nothing but scraps and sweat turning neglect into a playground of possibility. A Saturday morning in New Orleans could start with a hum, steel drums tuning up, neighbors pulling folding chairs onto porches, and children darting between adults with arms full of bright kente cloth. The block parade wasn't just a party, it was a production. Organizers, mostly mothers and aunties, went door to door collecting $1 here, 50 cents there, until they had enough to cover the city's $50 street closure fee. They pulled cash for a permit, hired an off-duty officer to stand watch, and stretched the rest for homemade banners and snacks. Flyers copied at the church office and handed out by kids promised music, food, and a procession that would wind from one end of the block to the other. At the heart of the parade, children led the way, some carrying signs, some beating drums, some dressed in West African prints their families had sewn the night before. The rhythms echoed not just New Orleans jazz, but the call and response of Caribbean and West African festivals passed down through generations. Older kids took charge of the logistics, taping off intersections, lining up the drummers, and making sure the littlest ones stayed in line. Even the parade route itself was mapped with care, avoiding potholes and making sure every elder's stoop was passed so no one missed the show. As the procession moved, neighbors danced behind the band, waving handkerchiefs and calling out names. The parade was a lesson in collective action, children learning how to budget, organize, and perform, all under the watchful eyes of a community that turned a single street into a stage. By the time the last drumbeat faded, the block had become a world unto itself, stitched together by sound, sweat, and the shared pride of pulling off something big together. After the school bell rang in West Philadelphia, kids fanned out across the blocks, each with a mental map of how far they could roam. The unwritten rule was clear: 4 blocks in any direction, but never past the avenue where traffic moved too fast and faces grew unfamiliar. Freedom came with signals. A porch whistle, 2 short blasts, and 1 long meant it was time to check in or head home. Shouts and coded calls bounced from stoop to stoop, weaving a net of watchful eyes across the neighborhood. Older siblings doubled as escorts, walking the youngest past tricky corners or stopping arguments before they could spread. On most afternoons, the sidewalks belonged to the children, but every parent, grandparent, and neighbor kept one ear open for trouble. In 1975, a scare rippled through the community when a local newspaper reported an attempted abduction near 52nd Street. The next day, parents and block captains organized a rotating night patrol, flashlights in hand, pacing the same routes their kids took by day. The buddy system became gospel. Nobody walked alone, especially after dark. Porch lights flickered on at dusk, the universal sign to head home before the streetlights buzzed to life. These routines weren't just about caution, they were acts of care, reminders that a child's freedom rested on a web of shared vigilance. In West Philly, autonomy wasn't solitary, it was a collective promise, renewed every afternoon, that every child would make it back to their own front door. A single red, white, and blue barber pole spun outside Mr. Johnson's shop on Lenox Avenue, drawing a steady line of children every Saturday morning. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of pomade and talcum powder, the buzz of clippers, and the low hum of adult conversation. A $3 buzz cut was more than a trim. It was a lesson in posture, patience, and pride. Children sat shoulder to shoulder, waiting their turn, listening as grown men debated city politics, baseball scores, and the latest news from City College. Between snips, Mr. Johnson quizzed boys on their schoolwork or asked about their mothers, reminding them to greet every elder in the shop with a handshake and say, "Yes, sir," or "Yes, ma'am." In the back, Miss Denise's beauty chair was a classroom of its own. Young girls watched as she pressed and curled hair, teaching them to sit still, mind their manners, and thank her with a smile and a tip. Sometimes a quarter, sometimes a hug. Before the first day of school, the line stretched out the door. Ms. Denise would offer advice on how to keep a part straight, how to wrap a scarf at night, or how to walk out with your head high, no matter what was in your closet. The walls were lined with faded back-to-school ads and snapshots of children beaming after their first haircut or fresh press. Every visit was a rite of passage, from the nervous anticipation of a first edge up to the pride of learning how to tip a stylist. These shops were more than grooming stations. They were civics classrooms where children learned the art of personal presentation, the etiquette of public spaces, and the power of being seen and heard. In every reflection, a child glimpsed not just their own face, but the community's hope and investment looking back. On the stoops and sidewalks of Los Angeles, style started with what you already had. A $2 thrift store jacket, too big in the shoulders, could be cut down and restitched by hand, turning a hand-me-down into a statement piece. Kids learned to sew from grandmothers, swap patterns with neighbors, and trade fabric scraps for buttons or patches. Sneakers, scuffed from the schoolyard, got new life with homemade fabric paint recipes, sometimes just acrylic mixed with a splash of dish soap, layered on with a steady hand and a borrowed brush. Every pair became a canvas, each design a badge of personality. But it was not just about clothes. On weekend afternoons, clusters of teens gathered on stoops, radios blasting funk and early disco, inventing new moves that would later echo across the country. The popping and locking that would fill music videos in the 1980s had its roots here, born from hours of experimentation and playful one-upmanship. Dancers practiced in the reflection of apartment windows, perfecting routines that mixed sharp angles with smooth slides. each step feeding off the crowd's energy. No one needed a studio, the sidewalk was stage enough. Fashion and dance became a language, one that spoke of pride, resourcefulness, and the drive to stand out in a world where money was tight, but imagination was boundless. School dance photos from the era show teens in reworked blazers, painted sneakers, and homemade jewelry, each outfit telling its own story. Oral histories from young designers recall the thrill of seeing a friend wear something you had altered, or catching your own move mirrored by someone across town. What started as necessity grew into a kind of collective genius, a spirit that would shape pop culture for decades to come. Every stitched seam and improvised dance step was a lesson in turning scarcity into style and individuality into community pride. In Cleveland, the real foundation of childhood freedom was built by adults who answered to no official title, just auntie, uncle, or Miss So-and-so from down the block. On any given afternoon, a child might pass through a chain of 5 porches, each watched by a different neighbor, each porch a checkpoint of safety and care. This was not a formal program or a posted rule. It was a living network, woven from trust and long memory. A shopkeeper might call out to a child by name, reminding them to hurry home before dark. And the coach would pause practice to walk a younger player across a busy street. The local hairstylist, between appointments, might settle a playground argument or offer a word of encouragement about next week's spelling test. Homework circles met weekly in living rooms and church basements, led by elders who never let a wrong answer go unchallenged or a hungry stomach go unnoticed. Children learned to recite multiplication tables, read aloud from library books, and listen as adults swapped stories about the old neighborhood. These circles did not just sharpen pencils, they sharpened ambition. In more than one case, a child who sat at those tables returned years later as a teacher, a pastor, or even a city council member, carrying forward the lessons first learned under the watchful gaze of a neighbor. This distributed supervision, sometimes called allo-parenting by scholars, meant that every adult felt responsible for every child. Block guardians kept an informal roster. They knew who had a fever last week, who was struggling with math, and whose father had lost a job. They pooled resources for field trips, shared discipline when needed, and pulled pride when a kid brought home a trophy or a good report card. Oral histories from Cleveland and cities like it echo with the same refrain: the village was real, and its boundaries were drawn by the reach of adult concern, not by fences or property lines. The result was a world where children moved through their neighborhoods with confidence, knowing that help, correction, or a quick snack was never far away. The feeling of paradise did not come from the streets or the playgrounds alone. It came from the certainty that someone was always looking out, ready to guide, protect, and celebrate every step forward. In this web of mentorship, the simplest block became a launch pad, and every child grew up rich in adults who believed their future was worth investing in. Across all 10 experiences, one pattern stands out: resourcefulness and community turned scarcity into abundance. Play, style, and mentorship were not just pastimes, they were creative survival tools, binding generations together. That social wealth endures, reminding us that true paradise is not about material comfort, but about belonging and collective joy. Which memory resonated most with you? Share your thoughts below.